Grace to you and peace, everyone. Welcome. To this service of the worship of God, in memory of and in deep thanksgiving for Steve Marquardt. We gather here today on the common ground of grief and at the same time share a deep thanksgiving for such a life, such character. This celebration contains both and is intended to remind us that God, the creating, redeeming, and sustaining energy of the universe, can always make everything new. It's good to be together on a day such as this because it permits us once again to experience the preciousness of relationships and the deeper questions that we barely have time to contemplate. Where did we come from? What are we supposed to be doing? Where are we going? And what happens when we die? Such questions can leave us practically breathless. And because of that, being together is such a great blessing, just as the life of Steve Marquardt was such a great blessing. Let us pray. Holy One, whose love for us is always without condition, and through whom nothing is ever irreparably broken, speak to us now of eternal things, that we may have hope and be lifted from our ordinary lives into the extraordinary and healing awareness of your purposes. Surely we shall dwell in your house forever. Amen. Let us stand to sing the hymn, I was there to hear your morning cry.
What? 'Cause what I've begun, when the evening is done, and
Let us join together in the reading of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord. At this time, I invite Jan Anderson to come forward and read the words to the poem When Memory Fades. Jan and Judy grew up together.
When memory fades and recognition falters, when eyes we love grow dim and minds confused, speak to our souls of love that never alters. Speak to our hearts by pain and fear abused. O God of life and healing peace, empower us with patient courage by your grace infused. As the frailness grows and youthful strengths diminish, in weary arms which work their earnest fill, your aging servants labor now to finish their earthly tasks, as fits your mysteries will. We grieve their waning, yet rejoice, believing your arms unwearied shall uphold us still. Within your spirit, goodness lives unfading. The past and future mingle into one. All joys remain, unshadowed light pervading. No valued deed will ever be undone. Your mind enfolds all finite acts and offerings. Held in your heart, our deathless life is one.
Now, Melinda Harris, Sam Marquardt's wife, will read the facts of Steve's life and his character.
I want to preface this by saying that these are not my words. I was selected as the person that would be able to read them. This is the obituary that was written by Sam, Steve's kid, and proofread by Judy. Steve Marquardt, aged 80, passed away on August 31st, 2024, in St. Paul, Minnesota, after a battle with Alzheimer's disease. He leaves behind a legacy as a devoted husband, father, brother, friend, and a pillar of his community. Steve was born in St. Paul and spent formative years in Mankato, Minnesota, and Hinsdale, Illinois. He returned to St. Paul to attend Macalester College, making lifelong friends and meeting his wife of 56 years, Judy. His educational journey continued at the University of Minnesota, where he earned master's degrees in history and library science before completing his PhD in history. Steve and Judy spent a magical season in Paris while Steve was conducting research for his dissertation. Steve's professional journey took the family to New Mexico, Illinois, and Ohio, before he held leadership positions as library director at the University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire and Dean of Libraries at South Dakota State University in Brookings. He developed many deep friendships along the way. Steve was widely appreciated for his intellect and quick wit. As a lifetime librarian, Steve was dedicated to books and read voraciously, mostly nonfiction. He kept up with current events and often wrote letters to the editor. Steve enjoyed biking, tennis, running, cross-country skiing, reading, music, and movies, sharing his interests and his humor through clipping cartoons and articles for his loved ones. If you know, you know. His biking adventures with his riding buddies took him on the Ride Across Minnesota tram more than 7 times, as well as the Tour de Wyoming and a ride from Missoula to Bozeman in Montana. He was undaunted by mountains, both physical and metaphorical. Steve's life was marked by his commitment to making the world a better place for everyone. Steve was a passionate advocate for human rights, working closely with Amnesty International and local civil rights groups. In 2006, he was recognized by the Brookings Human Rights Commission with the Butler Human Rights Award. And in 2015, he received the Distinguished Citizens Award from Macalester College, which is given to alumni who have demonstrated outstanding leadership, achievement, and active involvement with their local community through their lifetime. Steve retired in 2006 to a home on the shores of Big Candy Ojai Lake in west central Minnesota, where the family had spent summers for years. He dedicated himself to continued letter writing for Amnesty International and advocacy for free libraries in Cuba. He enjoyed daily walks, swimming, biking, and cross-country skiing, embracing his environment year-round. He found particular joy in feeding the birds and squirrels. His consistent dedication to community service was evident as he adopted and maintained a stretch of road in Candy Ojai County, volunteered for the local DFL party, and served as both president of the church council and as a Stephen minister at United Lutheran Church in Lake Lillian. Steve is survived by many friends, family, and loved ones, including all of us gathered here today. His commitment to his family, career, and community will be deeply missed and forever remembered.
Now, some memories from 3 people, Tracy Brown, Judy, and Steve's niece. And then Mary Hogg would have been here from Brookings, but she woke up with COVID this morning. And so her remarks will be read by Joan Hogan. And then Paul Anderson. Please, Tracy.
I'd like to preface this by saying that these are my words, and I hope that I can say them. And I also hope that they represent memories of all of us. Family Ties, copyright 1986, Tracy Brown, Chapter 1. The day started out normal. I got ready for breakfast, pulling back my hair and tying it with a pink ribbon and nicely feathered my bangs. I ate breakfast, and when I was ready, my brother Mitch gave me a ride to school. Yep, those are the first lines of my novel. And I can read them to you today because in 1986, when I was 12 years old, my Uncle Steve told me I could be an author. He took the work of an obviously boy-crazy preteen and he typed it up, copyright and all. I honestly thought I'd been published. It was a big deal. Steve always made me feel like a big deal. The words in my novel did not stand the test of time. But Steve's words are timeless. He knew the important words. He knew their power, as Melinda has already read. He wrote thousands of letters. He wrote to local, state, and national governments. He wrote letters for Amnesty International. He wrote statements against capital punishment and in support of free speech. He fought for LGBTQ rights and for open libraries in Cuba. He fought for human rights close to home and around the world. As we sat in our family's happy hour circle, however, Steve's words were rare. When I remember Steve at happy hour, I think of peanuts still in the shell. I think of a constantly bouncing knee. He was always in motion. I think of a good German beer. I remember the many times that he was late because he was off biking around the Tri-County area. And I remember that the t-shirts he wore often made statements. But Steve was mostly quiet. Steve's messages to our family came in other ways. Every year at Christmas, he created a cartoon for my grandparents. It was always a family story from that year, something lighthearted and funny, but always something that carried significance. It was a good example of how Steve was always recording our history. As my sisters and I were remembering Steve, we commented on just how amazing it was that he was always so quietly, but so constantly paying attention and recording our history. We would arrive at the lake to find an envelope of those newspaper clippings on the table that he had been saving for us. He sent us articles in the mail, and then when we got email, he started sending emails. Oh, so many emails. His messages were always attuned to our individual interests, what we would, or sometimes what we should be interested in. Steve believed that we should be introduced to culture. When we were young, it was his doing that we went to see Hansel and Gretel, the opera. It's possible that we were too young to appreciate that experience, but I was lucky 20 years later when he tried again and invited me to a simulcast of Tristan and Isolde. I was honored that he gave me a second chance and very relieved to actually enjoy it very much. Lawrence of Arabia, I might not be ready for that one quite yet. We remember Steve being active and healthy, going to Wilmer to play tennis with Paul Anderson, sometimes getting to go along and play in the park with Isa and Marina. We remember him cross-country skiing. In his winters at the lake, he made a course through the county park, and of course, biking and biking and biking and biking. We also remember him taking care of the natural world, maintaining a beautiful yard by picking weeds by hand instead of using chemicals, continuing to use a push mower well beyond the rest of the world, and feeding the birds. Oh, so many birds. He would always wash the dishes by hand, conserving as much water as possible. When Kate and Mark bought Judy and Steve's house at the lake, they ran into trouble with the hot water. There wasn't enough. The hot water heater must be broken. But no, Judy and Steve had installed a metered system that limited how and when the water would be heated, just taking care of the world. And of course, we couldn't miss the lesson when he adopted the highway on the way to our cabin. Perhaps most of all, Steve taught us to take care of the human world. The underlying factor in all of his causes was humanity. And it is a character that is carried so strong in his child, Sam. So much of Steve can be seen in them. in their work at McKnight, in their gardening, their care for the world, their personal relationships, and their fighting for causes. Steve has left a very important part of himself in the world. The final chapter of Steve's life was devastating, but I think the hardest part of losing him so early is knowing that there are many chapters that won't be written, a chapter in which words could have been found, conversations could have been had, and new experiences shared. But if we keep remembering, I think we'll keep remembering more stories and find more messages that he left us. The importance of a little lovey-dovey during a game of Frisbee. The importance in homemade parade costumes, in camping trips, or father-child road trips. A million different things that he did to show his love. And hopefully we'll find what we need in those messages. He carried our rocks. He found our causes. He fought for our causes. He stayed quiet and let us speak. He listened. He believed in us. He fought relentlessly to make the world a better place for us.
Hi, I'm Joan Hogan. Both my husband and I were members of the faculty at South Dakota State University when Steve was Dean of Library. We became friends with Judy and Steve shortly after they arrived in Brookings, and we have cherished our friendship. Judy, thank you so much for asking me to fill in for Mary Alice. Yesterday, as our minister just said, Mary Alice tested positive for COVID, so she's unable to be with us. However, she had hoped to express her admiration for Steve and sent the following, which I'm pleased to share with you. These are not my words, they're Mary Alice's. So Mary Alice begins, Judy, Sam, and Melinda. I share your grief in the loss of your husband and father, and I send my love to you and to everyone who knew and loved Steve. I knew Steve in two capacities, colleague and friend. Steve was Dean of the Library Services at South Dakota State University, and as an aside, Mary Alice said, I must let you all know that among the women faculty members, he was known as the hot dean. And he was. Steve was really greatly admired at South Dakota State for his commitment to the library, for his dedication to providing services for faculty and students, and for his gentle nature. We also admired Steve for his involvement with Amnesty International and the Brookings Human Rights Commission, where he advocated for people who were unjustly treated in any way. For me, the two Steves, the colleague and the friend, merged into one because our conversations at social gatherings often involved books, which we both loved. I'll just mention Mary Alice taught English at South Dakota State for probably 40 years, quite a while. Steve suggested some of the best books Mary Alice has ever read. I remember reading The River of Doubt, Theodore Roosevelt's darkest journey, at Steve's recommendation. Although I was a South Dakota girl who had visited Mount Rushmore many times, I was much more interested in the other Roosevelt and his wife, Eleanor. However, this book revealed a fascinating man of many adventures, strengths, and faults. A man with many accomplishments as president, certainly more accomplishments as president than I had ever learned in my history classes. My favorite Steve recommendation, however, was Waiting for Snow in Havana, an eloquent memoir written by one of the children who left Cuba without their parents to escape the Castro regime. The book moved me with its beautiful and poignant story of loss and survival. It also piqued my interest in Cuba, most especially in the work being done by librarians like Steve to assist, support, and encourage librarians in Cuba who were struggling with government lack of funding and with censorship of library materials. Finally, Steve was a quiet, oftentimes serious man who somehow became friends with me, despite my tendency to be anything but serious in most situations. I think he put up with me because he knew I was very serious about good literature, a passion we both shared. Or maybe he put up with me and my relentless teasing because he was a patient and tolerant man. Either way, Steve, my friend, I don't know what you're reading now, but I'm quite certain it's a book I would love. And I'm also certain you're making someone up there a better reader because of your recommendations. You certainly did that for me. Love you, buddy. Those are Mary Alice's words. Thank you.
I have been given an impossible task. I was honored and humbled when Judy asked me to present a tribute and eulogy to Steve. I was less enthralled when she said I only had 6 or 7 minutes to do it. She said that if I went too long, Don would come up to me, gently put his arm over my shoulder, and escort me back to my seat. I ask you to indulge me a little bit. I may go over time, but I have to say some things about my very best friend. Steve and I first met right here at Macalester College, second week of September. It was the day that the Vikings played their first football game, and Van Tarkingen came in and beat the New York Giants. But that's not how I remember that day. That was a momentous day when I met my best lifelong friend. Steve was not the type of person I'd hoped to get as a roommate at Macalester. I was this farm kid. I came from a small school. I wanted a big man on campus type person to introduce me to college life. I did not get that. He did not fit the prototype. What instead I got was this fuzzy-cheeked kid from Hinsdale, Illinois, who showed up with a Wallensack reel-to-reel tape recorder with all of 9 of Beethoven's symphonies. This was not what I wanted, but he was not reluctant to chide me about my taste in music, Henry Mancini, Herb Alpert, the Kingston Trio. But I learned that he had a very sophisticated taste in music, classical, opera. But I remember clearly he was one of the first persons who discovered the Beatles before they became iconic. He had a taste for good music. Steve was smart, well-read. I often referred to Steve as my intellectual compass, and I really meant that. He introduced me to many of the finer aspects of life, including many different venues from which I got information. He introduced me to The Economist, I.F. Stone Weekly, Molly Ivins, Christian Science Monitor, and so much more. When I was asked, when I was on the court, where I got my information, to pair a list, the list came up to almost, well, this was over 20 sources. But the last thing on that list was the Steve Marquardt clipping service. Some of you in this room know what I speak. He would be an inveterate clipper of articles, which he would share with me and other friends. And when computers became ubiquitous, they came by email. Steve really loved the written word. He wrote thoughtful, insightful, and witty letters. I have a box, a big box at home. They were often single-spaced, 3 to 4 pages or more. They contained much information, but he would always start with some kind of a snide, witty remark. One of them I pulled out said, he wrote, "Well, we are in hay fever haven, in the land of muddy streams and silted bogs. Nothing wrong with the geography or politics that couldn't be cured by a good glacier. He loved postcards, was overjoyed when he found one that fit a particular situation. I found one where it showed somebody facing a firing squad, and he wrote on it, "Me, about to face my annual review." Steve earned a PhD in history. He had the idea of becoming a professor, but that field was crowded when he graduated. He became a librarian, a profession at which he excelled. He loved, I mean, this is true, he loved being able to share information with others. He did it through organization, services, designing a major library addition in the library at Eau Claire. He understood that for our civil democracy to endure, we needed an educated populace, and he was dedicated to accomplishing that goal. Our friendship was easy, totally devoid of pretense. When Steve and Judy returned from France, I went over to join Steve for a game of tennis. Judy was absolutely appalled and frustrated when I entered the room. Steve and I exchanged greetings like we had just seen each other a couple of days ago. She said, "How can you be that way? You're such good friends." But that's the way we were. We were just that close and that bond. He was wickedly smart. You never wanted to engage with him in a game of celebrity. He was kind. He seldom ever heard him denigrate anybody, although conservative politicians and friends could frustrate him, and he sometimes wrote about it. He enjoyed good food, gourmet wines, German beer. He introduced me to fine wines. I tasted my first fine wine at a dinner we shared in Boston. Steve ordered a bottle of Chateauneuf de Pape, a wine that I enjoy to this day. He loved Judy. He knew that she was a real treasure. They complemented each other very well. They made each other a better person. When I think of them, I says the whole of the two of them was so much greater than their individual parts. He loved Sam. He was devoted to her. They had a sweet father-child relationship. It was fun to observe them. They're both very witty, very smart, and their intellects would interject. And you could obviously see the love that they shared for each other. And, he enjoyed that he had such a smart and engaged and involved daughter that, like you, Sam, he really did. He said, "I'm so lucky to share my life with a child like her." Sam was generous. He shared his time and talents with others. He was modest, never boastful. He was a classic liberal. He would often support candidates who were a bit outside of the mainstream. And he was often appalled when someone like McGovern won. He said, "What in the world have I done?" But as we grow closer and closer to our views, I never quite caught up with him on social justice issues. He was a social justice activist. He was an advocate for equal justice for all, whether it's the rights of the LGBT community or equal rights for women. He devoted himself extensively to amnesty. He was an opponent to the death penalty. It was an issue, folks, upon which he had a major impact, and I'll tell you why. When the South Dakota legislature was considering legislation to ban the death penalty for juveniles in South Dakota, he worked diligently with his local state senator and finally convinced him to cast a vote to ban the penalty. It passed by one vote. Now, when Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote the Supreme Court opinion that banned the death penalty for juveniles as being cruel and unusual punishments, Kennedy noted in his opinion the evolving public attitude on issue. He specifically cited recent legislation passed by the legislature in South Dakota. That's Steve. He had an impact. He was an environmentalist. He was on the front edge of recycling. Oh, he used a push mower well into his later years. And he diligently picked up trash that set along Candy, Ohio counties. He was an athlete who exercised regularly. Oh my God, it was so frustrating. He ate so well, so much better than I did. And I can remember, John Lindley was here as we go through the line at Macalester, and back then he said, get some of those green things over there. Do you have an allergy to something that's green? He encouraging me to eat well. Our matches in tennis often came down to the last day of the year, before on New Year's Eve, before we went out to eat, we celebrated New Year's together. I used to frustrate him by eating a Snickers bar before our matches. I mean, for a healthy eater, this was offensive. But I said, you know, I needed this extra energy in order to beat him. Now, this was kind of fun. It's a personal memory. In 1990, when I was immersed in a campaign for governor in Minnesota, about a week or so before the election, I got in the mail a bag of bite-sized Snickers. And the note said, I hope this will provide you with enough energy to make it through election day. I mean, he did those kinds of things. We biked together, it's mentioned. When we turned 50, Steve said, hey, we got to do something to show we aren't that old. He said, let's sign up for Ride Across Minnesota. We did that ride well over a half dozen times. We rode in Montana, the mountains of Montana, Wyoming, and the foothills of South Dakota. Well, I was better at tennis. Steve was a much better biker than I was. And this is something that I want to leave with you this thought. When Steve rode his bike on these country roads, he did not ride through the country. He became part of it. It was a wonder to see. He was just so much a part of that environment. He loved the wilderness, especially the North Shore, the Boundary Waters. We spent many wonderful times together. And Judy and Jan and I, we had so many travels together. We were truly very, very good friends, and we enjoyed each other very much. As I get to the end, you've heard from all of us, you should pick up, there is some repetition, and that's the way it should be. Because that repetition has shown you a theme that has run through Steve's life. It is such a wonderful theme. He was such a wonderful person. As I close this eulogy, I'm reminded of something my mother, who lived to be 98, said about growing old. She said, one of the saddest things that you will experience as you grow old is the loss of good friends with whom you shared your short time on earth with. Steve passing has brought home to me the profound meaning of what my mother said. Life has become less full for me. So many times something happened. I said, oh, I want to share it with Steve. He's no longer to do it. I will need to be sustained by the memory of our wonderful friendship. To have shared my life with such a wonderful person was indeed a blessing. Steve, I am so grateful that you were my best friend.
Thank you to Jan and Melinda and Tracy and Joan / Mary and Paul. We're going to remain seated for the song, and there is a place for us to join in, but Valerie's going to lead it. One of the most important expressions of spiritual conviction is found in the 1942 Presbyterian Book of Common Worship and reads this way: "We thank thee for the unquenchable trust that life does not end with death." Deep in the human heart. Do we know this? No. Does it make sense? I think only if we pause long enough to think about it, and given the chaos and noise of life these days, that's hard. Deep in the human heart is that vast, uncharted territory we call the soul. It lies below the ordinariness of our lives, all the things that we are constantly being called to attend to all the day long. The ordinariness of our lives is driven mostly by our own needs, our egocentrism. How could it be otherwise? But beneath that, in that deep place, we are invited to open our hearts to the needs of other people and the concerns of God. The word God is not a thing, but it points to something that cannot be described in words, but which can be felt. And in those moments when we do feel, tears are likely to come. I think that what we feel is the conviction that we are all connected, all a part of the same thing. This conviction is obscured most of the time by our extreme individualism. And so we move along mostly not aware of that, but occasionally it breaks through. For example, when the great country singer George Jones died about 10 years ago, there was a service at the Opry in Nashville. Several of his songs were sung, but his best song, "He Stopped Loving Her Today," was sung by another great, Alan Jackson. The song tells the story of a man who was in love deeply with a woman who left him. And after the leaving, the man grieved strongly every day until he died. And at that point, the song says, he stopped loving her today. At that point, the audience, or the congregation, stood. Many placed their hands over their hearts. And likely most would have explained that by paying honor to George Jones and the song. But I think it was deeper than that. While unconscious for most, I think it was a testimony to the deep, unanswered questions, especially on that day: what happens when we die? That question and the other questions that really matter: where do we come from? Where are we going? What are we supposed to be doing? Are born of our deepest yearnings. Hopes, yes, but yearning says it better because there's so much energy in it. We can feel it. On this day and at this hour, we share in such questions, comforted by memories of Steve. But let's confess that we might also be comforted by the idea that the death of the body might actually be some kind of profound healing. Some kind of profound healing, and that beyond the bounds of vision between birth and death, there might just exist an awareness of those we have loved in life, that unquenchable life, trust that life does not end with death. Psalm 23 introduces us to that with the final phrase, dwell in the house of the Lord forever. It also invites us to consider the yearnings of our souls in a moment when memories of Steve Marquardt begin to contribute so strongly to the light on the road ahead. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. Holy One, from whom we come and to whom we return, we thank you for the good and miraculous gift of life, for its wonder and mystery, for the ties that bind us one to another. Open now our hearts and eclipse our ordinariness on this extraordinary day. Hold us now in the arms of grace. Amidst the chaos and noise of modern life, we thank you for revealing your way and for the meaning that lies hidden in the heart of sorrow, disappointment, and grief. We thank you for your guiding hand along the way of our pilgrimage. Hold us now in the arms of grace. And on this day, Holy One, we thank you for each other, for these precious moments we are spending together with an awareness of your holy presence, and for the great privilege of pausing to give thanks for the life of one whose character in memory now brings both tears and joy. Hold us now in the arms of grace. Now support us as we move forth from this place to return to our separate lives, holding memories and thanksgiving for the life of Steve Marquardt, whose work here is done and who, in your mercy, has been granted a safe lodging and peace at the last. We give thanks for Steve and will now carry his spirit forward, helping to light our way on the road ahead. Thanks be to God. Let us stand now to sing Amazing Grace, and I would just mention that this is a song that Steve and Judy and Valerie used at the end of every one of Steve's music therapy sessions, so it holds deep meaning, and it's a deep song. And also would mention that following this song, we'll be seated for the postlude, and then we'll go down and have a reception.
That saved a wretch
to God's gracious mercy and protection we commit you. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forever. Amen. Please be seated. Thank you, Valerie. Judy and the family will lead us downstairs for the reception.